I would now like to introduce this evening's topic. How does anyone get anything done anymore? Chief political writer for ABC Online and Walkley Award-winning journalist with over 10 years' experience covering national politics, our keynote speaker has worked extensively in radio, television and print media as a political commentator. A regular on ABC's Insiders programme since its inception in 2001, she's interested in new platforms for political reporting and has established a regular live Twittercast of parliamentary question time. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Annabel Crabb.
Well, thank you very much, Eddie, and thank you to Kevin too for that magnificent welcome. I certainly hope I'm still welcome at the end of my talk. I'd also like to thank the organisers for their very courageous move in thinking of me when the question, how does anyone get anything done anymore, crops up, because I'm legitimately astounded every time I get anything at all done. So I don't consider myself to be much of an authority on that topic. You can ask my accountant if you need any further information on that front. I'll do my best. Thank you also to all of you for battling the elements to get here this evening. I must say, as I was on the train heading for Gosford, I thought, well, I'm dealing with City Rail and I'm also dealing with adverse weather events. My odds of getting there are maybe 50-50 at best. And I thought when I get there, given this weather, I'll probably be addressing the catering staff and the town drunk. But I understand the town drunk is here, that's excellent. But so many more of you as well, so thank you for that. Now, the topic tonight is loosely based around the theme of civic governance. I thought I'd establish a couple of ground rules with you straight up. One is, I'm not going to use the word governance, because people who know what that means will probably disagree with my interpretation of it, and people who don't will immediately become unconscious with boredom as soon as I talk about governance. So, that's the one time I'm going to mention that word. 2, I shall only allow myself 3 mentions of iguanas or Belinda Neal. And that does count as 1. Although, I must say, I've only just got across the stunning news that that place is closing down. Is that correct? Has closed. Well, I assume there's a strong local debate about what is to take its place or what is to be erected on the spot. I hope it'll be perhaps a National Centre for Dispute Resolution, or if there's any money left in the BER fund, we could build a giant covered outdoor shouting area, perhaps, for national posterity. And thirdly, let me just apologise now if I offend anybody. I'm going to be talking a little bit about various levels of government, and if I lampoon anybody who's actually in the room, and that includes Belinda, please not be in the room, then I apologise for that. I want to talk, to begin with, about my private theory about government at all levels, which is that it's about outsourcing, really. It works at all different levels of government. I think that we elect a federal government because we need somebody to collect taxes, someone to deal with foreign governments, to be the bad guy when difficult things need to be done, and to do other crucial stuff like go to all of those open days and eat all the rubber chicken dinners that none of us could ever bear to eat. That's not to say, though, that we make the outsourcing process for federal government uncomplicated. And the thing that I love about Australian politics is that we have this incredible sense of humour about the way we elect federal governments. Every 3 years we come together and we decide, or we normally decide, to make someone the Prime Minister by giving them a balance of power in the lower house. And that's all fairly uncomplicated, normally. But then we grab the Senate ballot paper. Now, I know you feel it too, ladies and gentlemen. That giant thing looks like a bedsheet, and for some reason, those of us who have voted very sensibly in the lower house decide to go a little wacko when we fill out that bedsheet. All of a sudden, it's a fishing party. All right, you guys look interesting. Or Bob Brown, doesn't he have lovely eyes? I'm going to vote for him. And all of a sudden, you've inflicted upon the unsuspecting individual that you've just made Prime Minister of Australia a Senate that they can't possibly work with. It's like our instant revenge on the governments that we elect. Giving yourself airs just because you're Prime Minister? Well, whack! Here you go. Have that Senate. So, in 1996, for instance, we gave John Howard the Prime Ministership of Australia, but we visited upon him a righteous plague of Democrats, Greens, Harradines and Colstons. And in 1998, we let him have his GST, but we elected enough Democrats to ensure that he spent 6 months in absolute hell trying to work out the difference between the tax status of lavash bread as opposed to white sliced and chicken nuggets served hot and cold. In 2001 and 2004, we did it again. In 2001, we did it again. In 2004, we played the best practical joke on John Howard ever, which was to give him the power, balance of power in the Senate, a complicated political manoeuvre, which I will call enough rope. Enough power for him to enact work choices, thereby cooking his own goose. And in 2007, it happened again. Kevin Rudd won the lower house comfortably, but the Australian sense of humour, collectively expressed through the Senate ballot paper, gave him Nick Xenophon in the Senate, as well as Steve Fielding, a Victorian Family First senator who was elected because a bunch of Labor campaigners in Victoria forgot how to count. But, of course, we left our best joke for 2010. This year, we decided to mess with their heads in 2 houses of Parliament. And I will say, as a quick aside, as odd as this format is, and I've spent a couple of weeks now hanging around in Parliament House watching this House of Representatives operate, and as odd as you think it might be to conduct business where any degree of success in the lower house involves building a coalition involving both Bob Katter and the Greens and a rug salesman from Tasmania, Andrew Wilkie, who is now another important part of that balance, I've got to say, it's working all right. I mean, it's bizarre, it's crazy, it's very messy, but the thing that I like about it is that this new Parliament demands that every MP has to turn up and vote, every MP has to express a point of view, and has to stand up and be counted, because every single number matters. And I think that's kind of a refreshing change in our democracy. It's crazy, but at least it's honest most of the time. So anyway, we outsource all these things to the federal government, but we want to have a bit of fun while we're doing it, and we reserve the right, of course, certainly in my case, to criticise constantly when we reckon they're not making much of a fist of it. Why do we outsource to state governments? Well, in New South Wales at the moment, it's kind of a tricky question to answer. I mean, I live in New South Wales. I don't report on the New South Wales government because I haven't had my full range of immunisations yet, but I can watch it. And I'm still not quite sure why we outsource things to the New South Wales state government. I guess maybe no one citizen could possibly do all that underpant dancing, mind-changing, lunching, infighting and money-wasting all by themselves. Generally, though, at the state level, what you're looking for is police, schools, hospitals, and the like. And what do we outsource to local governments? Well, the local government tier, in my opinion, is the most overlooked and in many ways the most difficult tier of government. It's the most overlooked in Canberra, although Kevin Rudd did have a go at it in 2008 when he convened a national local government summit in Canberra. Remember that? You might have missed it. He was having quite a few national summits at the time. I think it fell between the National Summit for Tough Humanity and the one for Humane Toughness or something like that. And it might be the most overlooked, but local government tends, in my experience, and I've reported on all 3 tiers of government, to be the most emotionally charged and the most hotly debated tier of government in this country, except, of course, student politics, which has always been just mad and continues to be so, as far as I know. I try not to pick up the phone when those guys call. So, why is that? Well, in local government, the issues are immediate, and the people who are involved live really close to you. And the issues are not the easy things, not the easy stuff like how do we solve the Middle East situation, or how do we deregulate the dairy industry, or fix the national hospital system. It involves seriously hard stuff like, so, whose house is this dump going to go next to? Or, guess what? You're all going to have smaller rubbish bins. Local government's harder too because there's nowhere to hide. A federal minister can hide behind a national bureaucracy or the national interest, or if all else fails, a generously sized pot plant, if enraged stakeholders should ever come to call. A state minister can blame funding shortfalls, colleagues, or, more conventionally, the federal government. But where can a councillor hide or a mayor when an enraged constituent is on the warpath? Hardly anywhere, especially if that constituent lives on the same street. In fact, in my experience, a local government can only ever hide behind procedure. A local government official's only protection is Section 30 of the State Blah 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 Act, subsection 6A, clause 36D. Here's a hint. If somebody's quoting something at you that sounds to all intents and purposes like a bra size, then the chances are you are in local government. Why are local governments seemingly often mired in red tape? Because in some ways, red tape's their only protection. Take standing orders, for example. You know the rules of meeting procedure? Well, of all of the tiers of government I've watched in my career, none is as good at standing orders as local government. I started off as a reporter in 1997, and it was at the Adelaide Advertiser. I started off as a cadet, doing all the basic stuff, police rounds, following ambulances, working through the night, putting in lotto numbers. I only did that for about 3 days until somebody realised that was a really bad idea. Not very good with numbers. But I used to cover the Port Adelaide Council, which, pound for pound, was the most seething pit of controversy of any tier of government I've ever witnessed. I've seen 2-hour debates happen on a standing order on one point of procedure even before the actual debate happens. I met all of the characters of local government that seem to be present everywhere, and here's where I'm about to offend somebody. The characters are there, the standing orders nerd, every council has one, the conscientious objector who speaks out against everything, Martin Luther King, who has a 2-hour speech to make on just about any issue before the council. Are you recognising any of these characters? Even nowadays, with federal parliament and Bronwyn Bishop, who is the most enthusiastic leaper up in parliament on a point of order, I never see anything approaching that intensity that I learned about in local government. It's a protection. And as you all know, disputes can be extremely emotional when they are at this local level. It's like in Europe, where the strongest antipathies are always for the countries with whom you share a common border. Proximity breeds hostility in some circumstances. It breeds other things too, which I'll come to, but let's deal with the hostility first. Now, I've got a couple of examples for you from England. Just thought I'd repair somewhere comfortably distant for a minute. Now, the English demand for privacy is legendary. There's a great book called Watching the English by an English anthropologist called Kate Fox, who talks about the British obsession with privacy. It's a great book. Like she's English, but she writes this anthropological work on her own people. The book starts off where she's doing an experiment at Waterloo Station at rush hours, really, really crowded place. And she starts off by having a double brandy. And as she explains, she said she's going to go out and do something very unnatural for an English person, which is she's going to go out and try to bump into people. And her experiment is this. She walks through Waterloo Station, bumping into people intentionally and counting how many people apologise to her. And the apology rate's about 80%. So she bumps into people and they invariably say, oh, sorry, even though it's not their fault. And this is kind of a prime characteristic of the English that she goes into. But she also talks about the obsession with privacy. She talks about people who have been catching the train together for 30 years on from the same platform, same train every day, who have never spoken, because there's this fear that once you do speak, then you're compelled to speak again the next day, and they fear being locked into a loveless friendship.